You're listening to the Scaling Culture Podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Lars Schmidt, who is the founder of the Redefining HR Accelerator and Amplify, an HR executive search and consulting firm. Lars has spent over 20 years in the industry, building a range of leading global companies. He's a writer for Fast Company, author of the best-selling book Redefining HR, co-author of Employer Branding for Dummies, and host of the Redefining HR podcast. In this episode, Ron and Lars discuss what modern HR looks like and how it operates, how to make change from command and control to decentralized, empowering structures, and how to drive accountability and reporting in those structures.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today I'm extremely excited to have Lars Schmidt with us. Lars, how you doing?
Yeah, Ron, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, especially so last minute. You know, I'm kind of like a dog with a bone sometimes. If I see someone who I find really interesting and providing great content and doing cool things, I'm like, I need to talk to this person. So I had you on my list, and I was like, I need to connect with Lars. So I'm really excited to have you today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and glad my work elicited that response. So yeah. Let's hope I don't let you down.
You should be proud. That's right. That's right. A lot of pressure, Lars.
Yeah,
a lot of
right.
pressure. So, Lars, we've already done an intro for you, but give me a snapshot. Like, who are you? Where do you come from, and why this focus on HR? What's driving you to be in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm an entrepreneur, a podcaster, author. I've got a lot of slashes. It's kind of embarrassing to go over the full bio, so I'll keep it light. In terms of what drew me to HR, I mean, my background, I kind of came up more through the recruiting and talent side. So I ran global recruiting teams at Ticketmaster and Magento, and most recently NPR. Then I started my firm Amplify, which was kind of launched as a consulting firm, mostly doing employer brand strategy and recruiting optimization. And then that kind of transitioned into co-founding a not-for-profit called HR Open Source, which is really a global platform that I founded with Ambrosia Vertesi, who is the CHRO of Hootsuite in Vancouver at the time. And we wanted to build something that was an open platform that kind of moved HR out of their, black box siloed past and got people collaborating and sharing and talking, and grew that to a community of over 10,000 practitioners in over 100 countries. And I think that shift and that, just seeing the potential for open practices, collaboration, and kind of shining a spotlight on innovative HR as a beacon to help move the entire industry forward, that just became something that I got very passionate about. And so, whether it was the editorial projects, writing for Fast Company, speaking at conferences, all of it was kind of oriented around like, how do we accelerate this shift that's taking place from kind of legacy HR to modern HR?
But go back to that. What was the moment that you said, this is wrong and we need to do something about it? Was there a one single moment? Did you have a bad experience? What happened to say, geez, this old school in the box thing's not working. We need to change it.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a single moment, but I had, back when I was at Ticketmaster, I was running recruiting and then was kind of being groomed to be the successor to the CHRO there. And our CHRO came from Southwest Airlines, Beverly Carmichael. And so I kind of learned HR under her. And that was really, I had the benefit of, I've always worked in organizations that valued HR. I've always worked in teams that were impactful. This whole like legacy stigma of, HR is this, HR. I've never worked in those environments. And the people that I spend time with have never worked in those environments. And so I think a lot of it was saying, okay, let's kind of reclaim the function, right? The legacy brush that we're often painted with doesn't apply to many people working in the space right now. And so that ties back to the origin of redefining HR. It was really saying, hey, let's think differently about, we operate differently. Our impact is differently. The way that we're, adding value to the organization is different. So let's, we're not legacy HR. Let's not, allow ourselves to be painted in that corner. Let's be the transformative kind of change agents that we can be. And so, I think it wasn't a single moment, but it was really the time I spent working for her. She became a friend and is still a mentor of mine. I think that just, that kind of showed me what HR could be at our best. And I wanted to, spend more time in that space.
Love it. Well, we share that where, and what I mean by that is, so Sherry Conway from Southwest has been a mentor and now friend of mine, and is actually writing the foreword for the next book. And so Southwest, I think, has inspired so many. If you think about this domino effect that that organization has had on organizations, people, it's incredible, right? I mean, it just seems to keep giving, right?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, when you look at, when you have leaders like that, their impact on the industry is so outsized because they instill their kind of perspective and vision and ideas and ideals and values into their team, and their team carries that forward. So it's incredible to see examples like that, where you just have a transformative leader that has actually created so many leaders from their own style who then carry that vision forward.
Yeah, I mean, my first experience was actually reading Nuts. Have you read that book? And if so, did you read it before you met her?
I haven't. And so, yeah, I did not read it before her.
Okay.
But I was familiar with them. It was actually, we joke about this now, but I was running recruiting. I was running global recruiting when we hired her. So of course I had to interview her. It was the first time, interviewing my future potential boss. And, it was it was awkward. I was nervous. I did one of my podcasts with her, where it was basically like kind of a look back and talking about, our relationship and mentoring. And, I'd kind of mentioned I was so nervous, and she was like, my recollection of that conversation is like, you grilled me. Like I was a little taken aback at how much you grilled me. And I was just like, I don't remember that at all. So yeah, it was a trip.
It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, she thinks she thinks she's getting grilled. Your hands are soaking wet. Your armpits are sweating. You're nervous, fumbling and fumbling, right?
Yeah, we can look back on that and laugh now, but that was funny.
That's great. So then Redefining HR, the podcast and the book, which just launched, 60 days, 90 days ago? It was pretty.
Yeah, January. I came out in January. Yep.
Well, congratulations. And
Thank you.
So what was the premise to get the book out there? What was the idea behind the book?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been covering the topics in the book for years. I mean, I've had columns in Fast Company and Forbes. I've had my podcast, obviously. I'd written a previous book on employer branding. So the whole kind of broad brush space of modern HR is an area that I've been covering for probably 7 years now. And I think I've developed a lot of individual content in those different editorial channels, whether it's podcasts, blog posts, articles, etc. But as those began to accumulate, I began having a stronger desire to write a more cohesive story, right? Something that kind of tied it all together and said, okay, like this is what HR can be at our best. This is what modern HR looks like. And that was really the driver in writing the book, was wanting to kind of take all of the ideas, the conversations, hundreds of interviews that I'd had, and tie them all together in a cohesive narrative that painted a broad picture of what modern HR looks like and how it operates.
So can you paint that picture? What does, from your perspective, modern HR look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's how much time do we have? It's a book worth of an answer. I'll try to distill it down. I mean, I kind of distilled it into 10 main components in terms of shifts from legacy to modern. And I'll just hit a couple of them, for you that I think will illustrate. One is kind of shifting from command and control structures to decentralizing and empowering structures. And what I mean by that is, legacy HR, there was this insecurity to the function. I think because of the stigmas and all the things we talked about, personnel, administrative, transactional, reactive, those were terms a lot of people painted HR with. And so in an effort to be, to get that seat at the table, which is, it's something we love talking about, we engineered all these systems and processes that made everything flow through us. And we felt that being the kind of approval gatekeeper would be our pathway to power, but it backfired. It caused resentment and frustration and cost us credibility. And so modern operators, they're not insecure about the value they bring to the business. They're viewed from the C-suite down as, value add partners, business operators focused on people. And so that's a big shift. And I think another one that kind of ties to that would be moving from, the way that we came from kind of a compliance, orientation in terms of where the origins of HR. And so I think too often we design policies and procedures around, what's the worst thing that somebody could do? cool, let's assume everybody's going to do that, and let's build policies that safeguard the company against that behavior. And so it was policy, against the few. And the shift is moving to policy for the many. It's like, let's assume that we're hiring adults. Let's assume people are going to make good decisions. Let's build policies that allow managers and to manage and leaders to lead. And if somebody, demonstrates bad behavior, address that individually. But let's not assume that every employee is going to do that and guard against that. And so I think those are just two mindset shifts.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, really, it's the role of an HR leader is being a business leader that's focused on people. Like the role of a CHRO or a CPO is, to me, next to the CEO, the most difficult job in the C-suite, just because of the sheer complexity of it and the volatility of what you're overseeing, which is your employee population, which, again, they all have different dynamics and drivers and needs, especially coming out of 2020. So, it's a very different function, I think, when you look at those best in class teams than the legacy teams.
So I love that. I think you're touching on two really critical things that are from old to new. And, as we talked about previously, I certainly had my own journey, in my previous company being in private security. And I was curious, what do you suggest for those who are still in this command and control? What's the first step? How do you move to decentralized? What is the best practice in that?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I think you have to look at, I actually back up from that. Before you get into kind of tactical actions that a CHRO or HR leader can take, you have to first assess, is the environment ready for that? Because you could have the most innovative and creative CHRO on the planet, but if they're working for a CEO and an executive team that doesn't get it, that doesn't view HR as that value add function, they're going to be capped. There's a limit to the impact they can have. And so kind of fully, leading that transformation probably isn't going to happen in that kind of environment. So we have to own that.
So let's go there for a sec, Lars. So let's just say, I joined this company and I'm like, it's time to move. I come from Google. Now I'm working for this old school, car manufacturer. I'm just pulling that out of thin air. But it's not ready. What are the steps to get it ready now? What is this, just a mindset shift? Is it educating the C-suite? What are some of the things that you've seen to say, okay, if you're not ready, then what?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is educating the C-suite first, because they have to buy in. Without their support and buy-in, you're not going to be able to make the kind of impact. You're not going to be able to kind of build the kind of people programs that I highlight in the book. So it's educating the leadership. It's helping them understand the value of progressive people operations and people teams, the impact that can have on the bottom line. So you can connect that to, revenue, productivity, whatever metrics that your CEO or, CFO or anybody on the C-suite is more compelled by. So, make that business case to them, bring lots of data. There's lots of case studies out there. There's lots of, white papers and research and reports that demonstrate the value of, high performing people teams on the bottom line. Mm-hmm. So start there with that education, process. If they don't get it, maybe find another job, to be honest with you. And I don't mean that to be, glib, but I think that there are some old school leaders who just, they can't get it and they won't get it. And they come from a different era. And I'm not, that isn't an age comment. It's just their mindset is tied to a different area where they view, people should want to have a job. You should want to work for me. You should be, lucky to have this job, right? If you have a leader like that, I don't know that they're going to change. And so I think you can present the kind of data to them and to try to, move them along in the journey. But ultimately, not all of them will be able to make that shift. And if you find that you're in that environment and you're that modern type of HR leader, you probably need to go somewhere else.
It's interesting because from my experience, there's two things that I think are relevant here. One is there's the data. Now I was the leader, so I was making the shift myself. And I actually had to go the other way. I had to convince folks what was in it for them. I had made the decisions on bottom line and whatnot. But the biggest impact to everybody else in the organization was they got their time back. Once we had empowered folks to make decisions, it was the time, and, I always tell stories about my office was a revolving door. People always came to me to answer questions. And, I think that strokes the ego quite well in the early stages. Then you figure out, wow, like I am the bottleneck here. I'm actually slowing others' growth down. And I'm not allowing them to learn, and I am the bottleneck of information, and decisions. And so, but in my case, interesting enough, again, because I was the sole shareholder and founder, My challenge in the private security industry was convincing the customer that this was the right decision. This freaked our customer out.
Yeah.
To say, what do you mean? We're not going to call Sarah or Johnny in the office anymore. No. You're going to deal directly with the leader that works at your site. And I had to really build trust and systemize that a little bit and really paint a picture for a customer to say, when you call Sarah and John at the office, with your challenge, they put you very low on the to-do list. We're going to move to a model here where you can talk to the site leader that works with you on a daily basis. You can, tell them your challenge and they can make a decision in real time. They don't need approval. They can make a decision. And that took some time because the industry wasn't ready for that.
Right.
Do you see a lot of that even the customers are not? In most cases, it's behind the scenes. Customer doesn't really know the difference. Or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in HR, it's a little different because, HR, the work of most HR is internal to the business and the organization. So, you may have, what I do see in some cases, especially for people that have made that shift to decentralize and empower, and they're empowering their HR manager, or not their HR, their line managers and leaders to make those decisions. If they haven't worked in that environment, that can be an adjustment for them. Yeah, you have to arm them to be able to have those conversations. Meaning, there's an incident happens between an employee and a manager, and the manager's instinct may be, well, I'm going to go to HR on this. In the environment I'm talking about, HR is going to push back and be like, no, you're the manager. You deal with this. Like,
figure it out.
Yeah, these are like, okay, here's the guidelines. So it's not like you're completely on your own. Here's some general guidelines, some constructs, but like, you don't bring every single thing that occurs to HR. You're the manager, you're the leader. You need to be able to manage through that. And so for some managers, that is a shift because they're used to having very kind of regimented programs where, everything gets, an incident happens and it gets escalated to a manager, a business partner, whoever. And then those companies that are practicing kind of that more decentralized model, that's for them to figure out. And so, HR has to support them with the tools and manager training so that we're not just saying, figure that out and, you're on your own. So you have to kind of shift towards making sure that your managers are trained on how to deal with those scenarios, but they're then expected to deal with them.
Well, it's interesting when you say train and tools, because I mean, our biggest challenge back to this business was the tools and training, right? Because, I talk a lot about this where owners and entrepreneurs are saying, would you just think like Lars, just make a decision like I would as the owner, but you would think very differently than me.
Yeah.
You'd probably make a very different decision. So the tool we put in place, the process, because we actually scrapped policies and procedures. I was really trying to move away from command and control. So we put in a decision-making process. We basically told everybody from a full-time, part-time security guard to the CFO, if you're going to make a decision on something you don't regularly make a decision on, ask yourself 3 questions. Is it the right thing for the customer? Yes or no? Is it the right thing for our business based on our values and purpose? And are you willing to be accountable? That system allowed us to, the subtitle of my book is Giving Employees Their Brains Back. Not that they didn't have employees, but it was giving them tapping into untapped potential, allowing them to set them free and give them guidelines for decisions. What other tools are you seeing, simple tools out there that are allowing, have you heard of something like that or other tools that are allowing folks to systemize decentralization decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, I think frameworks like the one that you mentioned, I do see companies doing that so there's like a basic kind of approach. Like you kind of check these 3 things, 4 things, whatever it might be. And if those align, you move forward.
We'll support you. We'll support you in the decision.
Exactly. Like we have your back essentially. So they know that they're empowered because I think especially when you add that accountability piece in there, that if you're not framing that the right way, that can become a bottleneck because if somebody's like, I don't really know, like I'm sure it's the right thing for the customer because they're asking me to do it. I think it's the right thing for the business because it's not incongruent with our values or bottom line or any of those things. I'm still not certain it's the right decision. And with me being accountable now, so I think you have to kind of frame that in a way that kind of contextualizes what that means and does it from a place of support. Meaning like we're not, we're not looking to peg this on somebody if the decision ends up being wrong. Like you're going to make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time. And we trust that will go well. And sometimes it won't. And when it doesn't, we still have your back. And so I think from a learning perspective, more specifically, you are starting to see more platforms coming out with, kind of micro learning, just in time learning type tools to make it easier for, somebody's in a scenario they haven't seen before. They can go into like a system and quickly do a search and pull up like, okay, this is how we approach X, or this is the decision framework to help me sort through Y. So just, making sure that employees are armed with those tools so they have that support and ultimately they feel more confident in their ability to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I would agree. Whether it's to an LMS that they say, how do you, deal with this certain issue, or, the strategy we also take is connectivity to their peers, having their peers answer these real-time questions, which also builds relationships. We do this in our new business on Workplace. Not only can employees say, hey, I've got this challenge, I don't know how to solve it. Boom, everybody jumps in. They love it. They have a different sense of purpose. And then we monthly, we get them together and have deeper dives into not just these quick, boom, I need help, but deeper dives into here's a challenge I have. Okay, who solved this problem before? And that seems to be a nice layer, a nice balance of content systems provided by us and human experience contacts.
Yeah. I mean, look, when you can leverage the collective intellect of your team and kind of create systems where they can all there's a camaraderie standpoint, there's a culture, value add to that. But also the reality is you probably have peers who've done and seen that exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So if you have a way to harness that perspective, or even search past conversations, right? So you're not asking the same questions over and over again. That's hugely powerful. And so I think that's why you see a lot of companies having those networks, whether they're using Slack or different tools, where people can kind of connect with their peers as well to get some of those answers that they might not have in their head.
Absolutely. And so from my experience, the two challenges going to decentralization, because, as I always talk about in the book, I certainly had a blindfold on when I was doing this, and it was trial and error, and I fell down a bunch of times. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, how have companies got it right or helped with when they go from command control to decentralized? How are they driving accountability? Because that's people's worry, is how do you still hold this organization accountable? Because it was easy on command and control. It's a little more difficult decentralized. What strategies are you seeing, Lars, that folks are doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think we're seeing that conversation play out right now in the shift to remote, right? For companies. Yes. And beyond COVID, everybody who had employees that could work from home shifted to remote seemingly overnight. And you had a lot of managers who were kind of like, well, if I don't see this person, how do I know that they're not working? And, I think the general response for people who've been doing this for a while is like, how'd you know they were working when you did see them? And just because you can physically see them at a desk doesn't mean they're being productive. Like, I think HR in general needs to do a better job in this new post-COVID reality. Obviously, we're not post-COVID yet, but as we're moving through it, of measuring impact and measuring results, not hours. So it's not about how long your butt is in the seat. It's not about where you're working. It's not about the hours of your work or the location of your work. It's about the output of your work. And, to be honest, I think as a field, we haven't done a great job of being able to measure that. And that's going to be one of the big challenges and opportunities for the field, moving into kind of whatever comes after COVID and this kind of new reality of work that we're in, is being able to change, being able to build systems, but also change mindsets from some of those, people that, again, they equated seeing somebody to, assuming that they were getting work done. And that, the idea that but just by seeing somebody, you knew that they were productive is kind of outlandish, but so many people thought that was their measure of productivity. So I think that's the big opportunity for HR. We've got to be much better about, measuring outputs, but then also changing mindsets in managers around like looking at the output of work, not the various inputs, because the inputs don't really matter as much if the output is there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, we certainly, and we were really lucky, Lars. COVID didn't change how we operate. We have an office here. We have folks that work from different places, and sometimes people go to the office. We don't set office hours, so we didn't miss a beat. We were really, really fortunate, and we kind of solved that problem in-house with two things. One, a cadence. Our biggest meeting is our most important, most valuable thing that we do is a daily huddle. That 152 every day. pain point challenges. What do people have? Just to connect people, understand what are the challenges, what keeps popping up that needs to be driven to a different meeting, different conversation. And then we've kind of moved to, I don't know if you ever read the book 4DX, which I liked, 4 Disciplines of Execution. It was about scorecarding. I liked it, but there was a gap in that too, because, the leading indicator versus lagging for like a salesperson, no problem. Okay, I have to make 4 phone calls, 5 meetings, blah, blah, blah. But where the gap is, if you have a project, if I have to rebuild onboarding, then you don't know what you don't know. And so what we've kind of done, which has been incredibly helpful, is if we leave a strategy meeting and someone like yourself has to rebuild onboarding, so we start and say, Lars, that's your project and it's at 0% completion today. Every week, let's check in. What's the one thing you're going to do to move that from 0 to 5%, 5 to 10? That's helped. But we've struggled a little bit with frontline leaders on that perspective in one of our businesses. Have you heard anything else? And I think that it is a challenge. Any other strategies that you're saying, simple strategies to, especially for larger companies, right? For me, I'm still small. We're scaling. But what are you seeing large companies do to implement accountability when it is far away from them?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time in tech. That's the kind of sector that the domain that I spend most time. And I think what you often see there are companies that use OKRs. Or objectives and key results as a way to measure, performance, but more around output. And it's typically done on a quarterly basis. It's cascading, so it kind of connects back to organizational goals. So at a department or an individual level, you can actually see how your work is impacting the broader company goals. But you have, a handful of them each quarter, and you kind of look at it on a quarter by quarter basis and you recalibrate it, because I think, often in kind of legacy approaches in HR, we'd have, like an annual set of goals, right? SMART goals, or however you want to frame them. And, a lot can happen in a year, as 2020 taught us, like the volatility that can take place, the priorities of the business can shift, the people can move into different roles. You could have a new product line that gets popped up mid-year and it's all hands on deck on that. So it's hard to map your full year in January without having the full visibility into what, August, November, December are going to look like. And so OKRs, framed around kind of more quarterly looks, I think are an effective way of saying, okay, like this quarter, we're going to be focusing on this. And you're kind of checking in, you kind of see exactly where you break down the main deliverable, and then you break down tasks to get there. So you can see you can see process and progress. So I think that is a pretty common approach in tech that I think works pretty well.
Yeah, interesting. And the second blind spot, I don't know, I'll call this blind spot because I felt that this was challenging for me, was when you move to decentralize is reporting, right? Mm-hmm. What are you seeing folks do to solve that issue, or what are some companies doing to redefine reporting? Because decentralized and reporting gets a little gray.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be, right? Like I think, obviously some companies like Zappos has experimented with holacracy and different kinds of models. I don't think that those have worked. Even Zappos kind of moved away from it eventually. I think it's having no manager, no structure, no title is a very weird place to operate as an employee. And so I think in more decentralized organizations, they tend to be a bit more flat. Some may even have more of kind of dotted line or hybrid type structure. So you have, a line of business, but you might have other departments or leaders that you work cross-functionally with. But I don't think that it's necessarily completely changed how we think about reporting and structure. It's maybe flattened it a little bit. But I think that, but it hasn't reinvented it, so to speak.
Yeah. It's interesting. We use dotted line. So if you're a frontline leader, you have a finance issue, you don't go to the old school way was go to the mid-level manager that dealt and triaged all these issues. Now it's okay, dotted line to finance, dotted line to HR, dotted line to sales. And that I think has certainly been helpful in a lot of respects. But I know what I was going to say is also, I think what you're referring to too is maybe those positions aren't gone, but the mindset, the approach is going from command and control manager to support and coach.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the role of a manager, I think in those environments is removing blockers and empowering, right? It's like, how can I create an environment where my employees can do their best work and have the most impact? And so it's less about, let me check in and say, okay, have you, completed this widget? Have you done this, task? It's more of like, okay, how are your projects? Is there anything in the way that are there any roadblocks that I can help remove? Right? Are you stuck in anywhere that I can maybe, support? So it's more of like the role of a manager empowering the employee rather than like, owning, for lack of a better word, their work and like checking out, like, tell me what you did here. What do you like? Not, micromanaging doesn't work in those decentralization. Those are in immediate conflict.
We talked about the mindset of the C-suite and those who aren't ready, but this also has happened to individuals within the organization. How do we get in front? How do you change the mindset of someone, whether they were a previous employer manager or they're coming into the organization, but come from a more command and control environment, to moving to more of a coach, moving to more of a, hey, I'm going to connect you with someone in this organization to solve the problem, or to our LMS, or support you. How do we make that shift? I've had a hard time with that in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is you need to be real clear about what the role of a manager is, and that shift from a coach. So what are the behaviors that you expect? What are the, mechanisms, check-ins, those sorts of things that you expect from managers when they're expected more to be kind of coaches of their teams than somebody, micromanaging their tasks and their day-to-day. So I think that's an important piece that it's one thing to say, hey, we want you to be more coaches than micromanagers. That statement without additional supporting resources of kind of what that means and how to get there, what that looks like, I think isn't that valuable. I think it's really important that, especially if you're making that shift, you have to say, these are the behaviors that we value. These are the ways that we want you to be able to support and interact with your teams. And even in some cases, kind of contrast them from the old expectations. So this is the role of a manager was X, Y, and Z. The role of a manager in this new kind of coach model is A, B, and C. And here's what's different. So you have to, I think a lot of companies that make that shift when it doesn't go well, some of the challenges is that they don't necessarily provide enough context in what that shift is, especially if they have managers who've only worked in those environments where, like, you're a manager. That means that you're responsible and you have to, keep your employees to task and, that kind of mindset. I think if you make that shift, you've got to really be effective at kind of contextualizing what that means and what behaviors are now different and kind of what's expected.
Yeah. I love that. That makes perfect sense. So that's great. Thanks for your insights on that. Super helpful for me and I'm sure to the listeners. Let me go to what do you see? What are going to be the changes now to the future? Like, so we've kind of gone from old school to today, calling redefining. But what does a future look like? What do you think are the major changes in the next 12, 24, 36 months that we'll see in this space?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we're going to see is this shift towards hybrid models driven by flexibility. And what I mean by flexibility is, we're going through this global phenomenon in COVID where, so many people shifted to remote, and it wasn't even just remote. Like, we talk about it as if it was remote work. Like, this is as suboptimal as remote gets. Like, your kids are home in many cases. You may have elder care issues. You may have mental health and anxiety struggles exacerbated by a global pandemic. I mean, this was not remote work. This is a lot of people say it's, working at home. It was like, it wasn't optimal remote work. But as we begin to move through this and more employees have had the ability, sometimes the first times in their career, to work from home and see how they can build a lifestyle around that. There's a lot of employees who will never go back in an office again. They just won't. And so I think from an HR perspective, we're entering this new age of personalization where, our past is largely rooted in playbooks and kind of set structures. This is how we do benefits. This is how we do time off. This is our working day. And I think we're going to have to rethink all of that as we move forward. So I think it's going to be much more about flexibility and personalization over the next 3 years.
And when you say personalization, Lars, are you saying, it's now moved from dealing with Lars Schmidt at work and now dealing with Lars as an individual? And hey, how are things in your home life? Like crossing over to places where, HR wouldn't go before, but now it feels like you need to worry about the individual, not just them at work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is certainly is part of that. I think as we talk about, empathy and compassion, and in HR we love to talk about kind of bringing your whole self to work. If we're honoring those things, I think that we do have to get to know employees in a different, less stoic way, I think, than we had in the past. And again, where there's an appetite for that, not all employees want to kind of be that open, and we have to honor that as well. But I think when I talk about flexibility and personalization, it's more that, the very constructs of work up until 2020 were largely held over from the industrial era, right? Work was Monday through Friday. Work was 9 to 5. Work was in an office. We've blown those things up, and some of us will never go back. So I think it's less about, this is kind of get back to my point earlier around measuring outputs and results, as opposed to like where and when and even how in some cases work gets done. That's the big shift. So some people, they won't be able to work 9 to 5. They have to work a little later because they got to bring their kids to school in the morning. Some won't be able to work in the city where your headquarters is based because they've moved for lifestyle reasons. And if you want to keep them employed, you have to allow them to be work remotely where they are. I think those ideas that in the past, it was, everybody came in office, everybody worked Monday through Friday, everybody like that, I think is what we have to start moving away from. And the future of the field will be more about the companies that can be really flexible in terms of how they design work systems that work for all employees. And that definition is going to be different for all employees. I think those are the ones that are really going to have an advantage from a talent perspective.
What's interesting, we had a previous guest that talked about this shift from career path to success path. And that I was like, wow, that you nailed it, because the old career path has changed. Now success path could be, I want to, our company has a global office in Sweden, and my success is I'd love to live there, or success is being a part of this project because it really interests me. And I think that's what you're saying, is really looking at things from that perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the reality too is, when you look at work now, it's not about career ladders, it's career lattices. People, it's not just about vertical progression in a role. It's vertical, it's horizontal, it's jagged,
right?
It's different. And every, for some employees, like their driver is going to be vertical progression. For other employees, it's going to be work-life balance. And they
right.
want to make sure that they're present for their kids' baseball games and events and activities. And they want to travel to, Europe once a month with their family or something. So like we have to honor that not everybody is going to have the same desires and wishes and same definitions of success. And that is a shift, I think, from how we looked at things in the past, where it was like, well, of course everybody wants to, become a manager. Everybody wants a VP title. Now that's not really the case.
Right. Yeah. So look, in closing, Lars, anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be impactful to the listeners today?
Yeah. I mean, I think just from an HR perspective and HR people ops, however you want to frame it, I think one of the other, core shifts that will be foundational for us as we kind of build this new path forward is really how we think about building inclusive companies and inclusive organizations, and really prioritize equity in our HR and people systems. I think, again, kind of tying it back to 2020, the events of 2020 have showed us, and I think have opened people in the HR space up more towards systemic inequity that's embedded in many of our organizations. And so as we're designing our future, it has to be kind of deeply rooted in equitable outcomes. And that, again, is another shift that I think in the past, we looked at it too narrowly through purely the lens of diversity, rather than, equity and inclusion. And I think that shift in mindset will allow us to really start making strides in an area that most companies have struggled with for decades.
Yeah, well said, Lars. I would agree. So where can we find you? People listening, where's your podcast and how do they order your books and tell us where our listeners can find you?
Yeah. So, redefininghr.com is the hub for all things. So podcast, book, courses, community, everything kind of that stems from that is all centralized there. So that's the best spot.
Great. Lars, really great to finally meet you. Thanks for your time and appreciate all your insights. Very valuable stuff. I was taking some notes today myself and have some great takeaways. So thank you from myself and everybody listening today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ron. Thanks so much for having me on. I enjoyed the chat.
For more information about Lars, please go to redefininghr.com. And for more information about Scaling Culture Podcast or our upcoming book or masterclass, Scaling Culture, go to ConnollyOwens.com. If you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please click the subscribe button and reshare the interview with your LinkedIn network. We'll be back next week with another incredible guest.